Hello, in today's video I will be going over how to install Mainsail on your 3D printer running Klipper as your firmware. Mainsail is an alternative to Octoprint for those running Klipper as their firmware of choice on their 3D printer. It is a lightweight, streamlined web interface. It supports common features such as webcams and also has built-in configuration editing through Mainsail itself, so no longer needing to go in through something such as Notepad++ to edit your configuration. You can do that on Mainsail. Now at this time, Mainsail is still in alpha, so there are currently no add-ons supported. However, through the Moonraker API, which that's what Mainsail uses to communicate with Klipper, there will be add-on support in the future, and there is work on porting some of the more common Octoprint add-ons to Klipper. So the way of installing Mainsail we'll be going over today is using the Mainsail OS. So Mainsail OS is currently in version 0.0.0.9. It is being updated. The installation instructions should not change too much. However, if there is any big changes to it, I will update this video in the future. So the first thing you're going to want to do is, if your printer currently runs Klipper and you're using Octoprint, the first thing you're going to want to do is save your configuration. So I'll go over a full installation of Mainsail OS on a fresh build. However, I will be using my SwitchWire printer here. So the SwitchWire here currently runs Octoprint as my interface for Klipper, and it's all set up and configured. So the first thing I'm going to do is save my configuration. So personally, I use Notepad++, and what I'm going to do is go to the configuration and I'm going to save that. So this will save me from having to reconfigure my printer once I install Mainsail OS. If you are going with a fresh build, you are going to have to configure it like you normally would. And then once you have your configuration saved, if you're flashing a printer that currently has Octoprint, you're going to want to download the latest version of Mainsail OS. And then once you have it downloaded, you are going to want to install it, of course, on your Raspberry Pi. So you're going to need the SD card out of the Raspberry Pi. And then if you have not done so, depending on what controller board you have, you may have to flash your firmware via SD or USB, depending on the board. The installation instructions for Klipper will cover which method of installation you need to use to install the firmware on your MCU. So as this is an SKR, we will be installing it via the SD card. And I will be using Balana Etcher here to install the image on the SD card. So once the flashing is complete, you're going to want to edit some files on it. So as this is a flashed image on an SD card, the easiest way I found to get at it, simply unplug the SD card and then plug it back in. There we go. And we're going to want to look for the WPA supplicant. So you would edit this as you would with Octoprint. So this is where you put your Wi-Fi ID here, and your SSID there, and then your password right here, such as that. And then also, don't forget, you have to delete the hashtags there before you save, otherwise it won't connect. And then the other file we're going to edit is the Mainsail one. And this is what we're going to edit, and this is for your webcam. So it defaults to a 640 by 480, 10 frame per second for your webcam. So what you would do here is simply input the resolution of whatever webcam you're using along with its frame rate, and also delete the hashtag and save that. And there we go. At this point, you're going to take your SD card and reinsert it into the Raspberry Pi, and we are going to power it on because we have to make a firmware file to flash the SKR. So for flashing the SKR, you have to do it over SD card. If your MCU can be flashed via USB, you can have it plugged in, and through the next step, you will be flashing it. However, with the SKR, we are going to have to generate a separate flash file for it. So at this point, you could reference the Klipper installation instructions on the Klipper GitHub for building and flashing your microcontroller. So we are going to have to SSH into our Raspberry Pi here. Now, if you don't know the IP address of your Raspberry Pi that you're using, you can just simply open up your router's web interface, and that should give you a list of everything that is currently connected to it. And go ahead and connect to it. The default password, or the default login is Pi, and the password is Raspberry. And now we're just going to copy and paste some commands. So cd Klipper, make menu config. And there we go. So at this point, what you're going to want to refer to is you're going to go to the Klipper section of the Klipper GitHub configuration section, and you're going to find what controller board you're using. So we have an SKR here, and we have the V1.3. And when you load it up, you can see here, this file contains common pin mappings for the Big Tree Tech SKR V1.3. To use this config, the firmware should be compiled for the LPC 1768. So that is the microcontroller. So we're going to select that here. And 1768. There we go. Now, some boards have more settings you have to adjust for making the makefile, but this one's a relatively simple one. Now, if you are reflashing a printer that is currently running Klipper through Octoprint, you may not have to reflash your board. You may be able to just simply update your Raspberry Pi to Mainsail. However, depending on what version of Klipper and which version of the firmware you have installed on your board, you may still have to follow this step. So exit, save. And then at this point, we're going to type make. And it will compile the firmware. And then once that's done, we're going to need to get that make file and copy it to the SD card that installs into the SKR. So for that, I use a program called WinSCP. And then once you're connected to it, you go to the out folder, and it's Klipper bin. You're going to want to save this to your desktop. I already have one there. Make sure you only have one there. And then you're going to rename that to firmware.bin. And you're going to put that file onto the SD card that you will be putting in your SKR. And then you're going to take that SD card, install it into your SKR, hook everything up, and when you plug it in for the first time and power goes to the SKR, you should see the light on it, the little LED flash for a few seconds, and that'll be it flashing the board for the firmware. So at this point, you're going to connect to the Raspberry Pi through your web browser of choice. And as you can see here, MainsailOS is up and running. However, we do not have a configuration. So we're going to the settings, machine, config file, and these two ones here are default. You need to leave these, don't modify them. We've got a new one here. We're going to call it printer.cfg. Create that. And then we're going to go into it. And at this point, we're going to paste our configuration. So if you are updating a printer that previously ran Klipper, this is where you would copy and paste your old configuration. If this is a new build, this is where you will put your default configuration and begin modifying and adjusting it as you would need to. We're going to save that. We're going to restart. And there we go. So as this is a working configuration, everything works and boots up properly. I don't have a webcam plugged in, otherwise you would see the webcam here. On this other printer that I have here, you can see the webcam. Now, one thing I do really like about Mainsail, it is a much quicker interface, boots up a lot quicker compared to Octoprint, and even simply just reloading the web page is much quicker. Now, it is still an alpha. At certain times, you are just going to have to refresh the page to see an update. They are working on getting some of those bugs corrected, but it is much more lightweight and snappier. For example, the one here for my V0, this is running on a Raspberry Pi. So this way it's powered completely off of the SKR Mini itself. No need for a buck converter or anything because the Raspberry Pi draws so little power. And it still has enough horsepower to run a webcam. So that is how you use Mainsail OS to install the Mainsail web interface. I'll have links below to all these pages here that have all the information and help that I used for this guide so you can follow along. Thank you for watching. If you do have any questions, please feel free to ask them in the comments below. I will have a link to the Mainsail Discord as well. It's a growing community there for Mainsail and Mainsail OS for the Clipper firmware. If you like this video, please throw a like, and if you would like to see more content such as this, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. I also have a Twitter now at 3DPNero, and I created that for communication for when I'm streaming, and I do stream on Saturday nights. It's mostly printer builds, but other electronics projects as well. Thank you for watching this video. Take care.